All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today on another edition of Navigating the Coronavirus Economy. This is episode 14. It's hard to believe already, but we are thankful to have a wonderful guest with us today who brings decades of experience in site selection, in identifying and finding properties for any kind of retail, restaurant, anything that needs a space. Hank is your guy, and Hank brings decades of awesome experience, and he's living through this right now with many in the franchise world, working with the franchisor, franchisees, helping people expand. And Hank is the vice president of real estate for Teriyaki Madness, and he has graciously accepted an invitation to share with you some information and things that he's learned, picked up along the way, and some nuggets of information about what's happening today, what he sees happening right now in the real estate market, and what he sees coming down the pipeline for future site selection for franchisees, maybe company-owned units, or whatever may be coming down the line. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to you, Hank, if you'd like to expand on your background and give any further information about you to share with the folks that are here now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My name is Hank Janik. I am currently the vice president of real estate for a brand called Teriyaki Madness. It is a 70 store brand of Asian food. My experience over I've been doing real estate for 30 years. I've worked for big brands such as Brinker International, Logan's, and Longhorn, which is part of Darden. And then I switched over to the franchise side and worked with Moe's Southwest Grill, had real estate for Moe's, Schlotsky's, and McAllister's Deli. When I first got involved and graduated from university, I got in the dry cleaning business and owned 5 cleaners. And so when I'm talking to people, franchisees within Teriyaki Madness or Moe's or anybody, I really feel like I know what you're going through when picking a business, when looking for real estate, when doing anything on that side of it. And whether it's real estate from a restaurant perspective or from any other business, real estate's a really important piece of the puzzle. And so I take a lot of pride in knowing the shoes that you're in and knowing how you guys feel. And so, yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, comments, always feel free to reach out to me or to Big Sky and they'll get in touch with me. But I'll just give you some, kind of a quick run through on some of what we look at Teriyaki Madness. There should be a presentation.
Yeah,
On the
Aubrey,
screen.
you want to go ahead and share your screen there and pop that up for us, please? Thank you.
So when you're looking for site criteria, or what I call here the basics of a good site, it doesn't really matter what your brand is. It is, the basics are important from everything. But one thing with Teriyaki Madness is not a place that you go to see. And much like a lot of new businesses, you need to make sure that you have visibility, that you aren't a destination necessarily. Because if you're banking on just destination traffic, you could have trouble. So whatever business it is, I think it's important to find the right square footage, find your sweet spot or your brand sweet spot. You don't want to go too big, you don't want to go too small. For us, we want to be in outlots of strip centers. We want to be right on the road. We want to have our visibility to be as high as possible. You want to be on a road that's traveled heavily so that people are consistently seeing you. And if the traffic counts are in the low teens, it's really not going to be enough traffic to generate excitement about whatever you're doing. We look for good co-tenancy, strong anchors. For us, a gym is a good anchor. Theaters are always good anchors. People are going in and out of movie theaters and looking at you. And then again, for food users, other food users are good. We are a fast casual diner, and so we like being close to Chipotle, close to Noodles and Companies, Five Guys. Our thought is, and again, this is true for any business. If people are going into a Chipotle, a successful Chipotle, they're looking at you as they're walking in saying, okay, I'm going to try Chipotle today, but maybe tomorrow I'll do Teriyaki Madness. And that goes for any business you're looking at. If you're selling cigars, again, people are walking into the Chipotle noticing the cigar shop. And so you want the good co-tenancy, you want the traffic drivers. Traffic drivers, we're listing here as shopping districts, schools, colleges, medical parks, health clubs, hospitals, anything where people are seeing your business is going to help. I was in Jacksonville this past week, and the franchisee there was talking about catering, and he saw a lot of opportunity in catering. And my response was, catering is so much harder than you expect it to be, and you want to put yourself again where there's high visibility, so on the way to work they're looking at you and saying, oh, there's a cigar shop, or oh, there's a whatever it is. And the constant reminder that you are there. Parking accessibility. I mean, almost real estate is all about accessibility and visibility. If you can be seen and they can get to you, you have a chance of being successful. Otherwise, you're going to have issues. And so make sure that there's enough parking and that it's easy enough to get to. Signage, I tell people repeatedly, you want to get as much signage as possible. You want people to see your store. This picture here is a good one. It's a nice location for Teriyaki Madness. It has the higher parapet with the the bold sign, so that it's from the road it's easy to see. If it's part of a 5-story building, I'm not a real fan of those type of locations because it's harder to get your brand recognition. But here, you've got you've got a patio. It shows the umbrellas that have your emblem on it. You've got the sign on the tower. You have a sign on the back. As much signage as possible. You can't oversign a spot, and don't go cheap on signage because there's other areas you can save on that. For signage, it's just too good of an opportunity to take advantage of it. Outdoor seating and
Hank, this is Tom. Sorry to interrupt you real quick. Just a quick question for you on that signage idea. So it looks like this Teriyaki Madness here is on an end cap. Do you, what is your thought? You said, don't go cheap on the signage. I think that's a great suggestion. I've seen oftentimes where a franchisee will try to, just not maximize their signage opportunity. Depending on the landlord in the space, sometimes they'll let you on an end cap do, the front of the side. They'll let you do both sides of the property. Do you recommend doing signage on both if they could do that?
I'd put it on the neighbor's space if they would allow you to do it. I mean, you want it everywhere. In all seriousness, you do want both sides. And I also encourage people to put it on the back of their building, because if, for example, behind you is a health club or behind you is a grocery store, as people go to the grocery store and walking out, they then are again reminded, oh yeah, there's Teriyaki Madness. I wonder what that is. Or there is the cigar shop. I wonder what that is. And so, yeah, you want to put it everywhere you can. And a good tip that I was told years ago by a very successful Moe's franchisee was that every shop he builds, he goes in for a sign variance. And he says sometimes he'll get it, sometimes he doesn't. But when he gets it, because it's a little bigger than his neighbor's sign, that it stands out a little more. And, to go from a one size sign to the next size, the expense isn't that great. And so try to make a sign as big as you can get it. I strongly recommend it. Like here, Teriyaki Madness has a problem with it. I get frustrated because if you look at the Cold Stone Creamery next door, the cold is bigger letters in the teriyaki. And to me, we should always make sure we have as big as lettering as possible, and sometimes we don't. So yes, signage to me is a real key.
Great. No, that's great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt here, but just that's a great point.
No, anytime you have questions. And then I go to outdoor seating and patios. I mean, again, it's more specific towards restaurants, but you know, if you are able to get outdoor seating, it doesn't cost you anything. And so for me, you want a patio. This is a really nice blocked off patio. There's another picture later on of another site, the same thing. It's got that blocked off patio. It doesn't cost you anything other than the fact that you're having to buy the furniture for the space and you're having to maintain it. If you can take advantage of it, always take advantage of it. And then my last comment on the page, for second generation space restaurants, I'm really a proponent of second generation space, and you're going to see me repeatedly talk about it through the next 4 slides, but it is good. Second generation space, no matter if it's restaurants or again cigars or firecracker sales. I mean, if the potential there is to have a good AC system. You can have flooring, you can have ceilings, you can have bathrooms. For restaurants, walk-in coolers, grease traps. I mean, these are all items that saves you tens of thousands of dollars. In the list, I put a list of 7 items, and for a restaurant, that savings is about $140,000 over doing it yourself. It's just shocking how expensive it is to open up any business, to finish out space, and that's where it goes back to the square footage. If you take a space that's too big, even that unneeded space takes money to run it, takes money to air condition it, to finish it out. And so you do want to find your sweet spot in the space size so that you can limit the amount that you're spending on it, on finishing it out. We can go to the next slide. It's been a real interesting. For one, this is my favorite location for Teriyaki Madness is in Colorado. But it's been real interesting, the pandemic and what we as a brand have learned from it. Our sales at the beginning of the pandemic took a very a 30%, 40% reduction. But then fairly quickly it started to go back up, and we are now at 10% over where we were, on same store sales from last year. So sales are back up. People have learned, okay, we aren't going to dine in, we're going to order on the phone, and stores have really been able to recoup the money that they were losing at the beginning on just purely on online sales. As far as opening, a lot of concerns with our franchisees is, do we really want to open during a pandemic? Do we really, shouldn't we wait on this? And we've had 7 openings in the month of May, and all of them are probably 25% higher than what 7 openings were last year. And what we're finding is people aren't able to eat at casual dining restaurants, and so they're trading down to Teriyaki Madness or other brands like us. And so it's been a huge benefit for us to open up stores during the pandemic because people are also excited to have new options and try new places. And so we have found that. Another area of
really quick, Hank, you made a really interesting point there about the consumer trading down from a what might have otherwise been a traditional full service restaurant and then going to a QSR or fast casual or something. That's an interesting thought that I just hadn't thought about. So anyway, for those folks tuning in here, I think that's an important takeaway. If you are in a full service restaurant, be thinking about what you're doing to make sure you have your to-go orders. But for those in QSR and fast casual, I think that's a great takeaway that customers are are coming in. I mean, if you're 10% over year over year, I mean, that's incredible to me.
Yeah, even for us, we've been really pleasantly surprised. I mean, our company furloughed employees in the beginning of March, and then we quickly added them back in again. But I know brands like BJ's are down 50%. Well, 50% of those sales went someplace, and some of it is in-home dining, but a lot of it is uh, spending more money at fast casuals like Teriyaki, like Chipotle, Noodles and Company, and the rest of them. Um, the next point being, we've started to believe or started to think, hey, we don't need these 2,000 square foot locations. Let's cut out the dining rooms. Let's make those dining rooms smaller. And again, it goes to any business. I mean, you can start, learning how much you can do online and save on rent and the cost again of finishing out. I mean, at Teriyaki Madness, we're going so far as to say, hey, our average size is probably 2,000 square feet. And now we're saying, why don't we try a 1,200 square foot restaurant? And we never would have done that. A 1,200 square foot restaurant that has no dining seating and is basically a Jimmy John's where you're just going in, picking up your food and then taking it to go. And so I think that's going to happen in the next few months, especially in markets like New York or high rent districts. A model like that would be extremely advantageous to us. And then lastly, we're going to get more insistent on having to-go parking. You can't always get it because there are big boxes that restrict to-go parking. But in those cases, you need to start looking outside of the box and saying, okay, let's do curbside pickup areas. And it doesn't have to be a parking spot in front of your business. It can be curbside pickup can be anywhere in your parking lot, just as long as you know the car and the car and you know when they get there. But this is for any business. It could be again cigar shops or firecracker sales. You say just order online. We'll bring it out to your car. Let us know when you're there and what car you're in. And so making adjustments to it, reacting to the changes that have occurred in the last 3 months. I strongly believe this is the best time to become a franchisee, and I would say in my lifetime. I spoke to Tom yesterday, and I said since 2008, but it's even better than what it was in 2008, and the reasons are pretty simple. I mean, my first point in this slide talks about a National Restaurants Association estimated that 30,000 restaurants had already closed, and that was early in March. Yesterday, Yelp reported that 12,000 stores had closed permanently. And so the numbers might be vague, but it's without question, restaurant brands that were struggling before the pandemic are likely to close now. I mean, it's concepts like Smashburger, Piology, Subway, Jersey Mike's. I mean, I could go on about the list. I looked at a Jimmy John's yesterday. Jimmy John's, you're thinking, is a very strong brand, but there are franchisees that are struggling, and you're now looking at opportunities for really good retail space. And again, even if you're not a restaurant company, if you're a cigar shop, taking over a Potbelly's that is finished out and has some of the things that you can use is a huge benefit. It is also forcing landlords to start waking up and saying, we can't be charging the rents we were charging 3 months ago. And my second point, being that landlords are in a weak position. You'll never hear them say it. They'll suggest to you that things are fine and that demand is still a bit there, but they are lying to you. I mean, it's a dramatically different world in the retail environment today than it was 4 months ago. There are always big boxes that have been struggling, but now there are small spaces that are becoming available in almost every area of business that you can start looking at and picking up. And my third point being the contractors. Contractors for the last 10 years have just slowly been ramping up their prices to finish out space. And it's been at times very hard to get them on time and to get them to do the work on time. And now they're becoming more reasonably priced. they're also more available than they ever have been. And so it's a great time again to take advantage of the availability of contractors. And then the last point being that when you talk to a franchisee, or when I've talked to franchisees, without question, the hardest part of owning a shop is finding good help. I mean, it's consistent across the board that that is the worst part of being a franchisee. But now with unemployment where it is, with stores cutting back, I mean, again, you're looking at all these restaurants that are closing. It's an employment base that there's with experience that are now looking for work. And in speaking with newer shops, they're finding it hard, but not as hard as it was. And so you're always going to have the pressure of finding the right employees. But I think we're in an environment now that you're going to have more opportunities, especially as the unemployment benefits start to go back to normal and they're not the extra benefits that they're giving.
Hank, I had a quick question for you, just a real quick question. I had a question about the for the landlords. You said negotiating rates and going through things right now. Are you seeing that similarly for commercial office space? I'm thinking about clients or people that may have maybe a corporate office. Maybe they've got a small corporate office, or maybe a mid-size space. They've got, I don't know, a few thousand square feet or 10,000 square feet. You know, what would you suggest for a company in that situation?
Yeah, I'm, you know, our corporate offices are in Denver, and I've talked to my CEO about going back to the landlord, and that's actually another point that needs to be made is, you know, going back to your landlords and trying to renegotiate. But they are hit with so much, so many issues now that they're going to push back pretty hard and say they can't do anything right now. But yeah, even for commercial spaces, for office space, you know, it's people are going to be downsizing. People are realizing that you can office from home effectively, and I think in the next, you know, I'm interested to see what's going to happen to downtown areas. In the last few months or the last 6 weeks, I've been to markets like Phoenix, Jacksonville yesterday, Austin last week, Chicago, Michigan. And across the board, it's, you know, what are going to happen to these heavily daytime populated areas? Is that, you know, is it ever going to be back to normal? And my answer is probably, I don't think it will. I think, you know, your suburban areas are going to become stronger during the daytime, especially again for online ordering. And the downtown areas are forever going to be weaker than what they were 6 months ago. And so it's something that's interesting, something that needs to be monitored, but yeah, and I put on this slide that it would happen just yesterday. Rates on a space that we were looking at 3 months ago are down 20%, and so I put on this particular page rate reductions as much as 20% in the last 3 months. I've heard of even more than that, and you know, even as recently as 6 weeks ago, landlords are saying, oh no, it's not going to change, and we're going to look at the big picture, and it's going to be 10 years. You know, this is a 10-year investment. We're not going to be giving rent reductions. But as space starts opening, both on commercial and office buildings and retail, landlords are going to have to adjust and say, okay, we can't be stubborn. If we want this space rented, we're going to have to be more reasonable. And so I think you're going to see that. And I don't put it here, but on tenant improvement allowance, and that's where the landlord is paying you to improve the space. They're giving more money. They're making it more enticing to take new space because they know there are opportunities for second generation space. And so, you know, ask for more money, really ramp up negotiating, and you know, just be as tough on landlords as you can be. And then this is just add a last piece of advice, and it's two things that I think franchisees tend to stray away from, and it's the use of brokers and attorneys. I personally, you know, I've got a real estate license. I'm a real estate expert, so-called expert, and yet when my daughter was doing a sandwich shop, we hired a broker. And there's no cost to you to hire a broker. They hopefully know what's coming up in the market. They know of second generation space before it even hits. Before that, I looked at a biology space yesterday in Jacksonville, and it's not even closed. And yet the landlord is wanting someone to take over that space. So, the normal Joe isn't even going to know that space is available, and yet the brokers do. And so brokers, I think, are important. They're not paid by you. They don't get paid until a job is done. And my point here, what other profession can you say that about? And certainly not my next group, which is attorneys. But I think an attorney is important in any facet of negotiating a lease. The landlord is going to be represented by an attorney. You have to be represented by an attorney. And so I add here, there's a attorney that I recommend. His name is Marshall Klein. He works with a lot of small businesses. He does a flat fee for negotiating leases. And, if anybody wants to contact him, just contact Big Sky and I'll get the number for you. But I would use brokers and I would use attorneys. And so at that point, I just, if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If you ever have any questions, just give me a call. I'm always make myself available to answer questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Hank. So do we have any questions from anyone that's tuning in while we have Hank here? Hank, I have a question I was thinking of. If I'm a franchisee and I've leased a space, and I'm keep planning to keep the doors open. I'm planning to keep open. What would you recommend, or what steps would you recommend in trying to renegotiate that lease with the landlord? Would you bring in the broker? Would you bring in the real estate or the lease agreement attorney? How would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And it's one that very early on in March, I did a video for franchisees for Teriyaki Madness and how to approach a landlord. For one thing is you should, if we've learned anything from this, you need to learn to have a good relationship with your landlord. I mean, it's whether it's in your home or your business, you should keep the communication with your landlord open at all times. And so when something like this happens, I don't like getting an attorney involved because it just becomes too of a legal issue. Whereas Teriyaki Madness owns 4 locations, and so I dealt with the landlords on those 4 locations. And the landlord that I had the best relationship with, he gave me rent off for 3 months. And so you can go to him and say, hey, we need to renegotiate the lease. I would, in almost, especially if you can show hardship. I mean, part of our problem after the first month is we couldn't show hardship anymore. I mean, our sales were up. It's hard to go and say, hey, we need a rent reduction. We're hurting. But if if there's hardship, if you can show a sales, if you can show that you had to furlough employees, yes, I would go back. If they're in a mode where they don't really want to negotiate, they also have a lot of people coming to them about issues depending on the size of the landlord. They also have obligations from banks, but yeah, I would definitely do it person to person. They can feel the pain that you're going through by calling them directly, and it builds that relationship. So that when that being said, I had one franchisee who went for a rent reduction, and then he said, I didn't get it. And I said, well, why didn't you? And his response was, well, my sales are up. This was even the first week of March. My sales were up 15%. And so my response was, well, why'd you even go for it? And so a landlord has to be cautious. They just can't give it to everybody. But if you can show hardship, if you can show sales reductions, if you can show that you've had to, furlough employees, present it to them, talk to them as a friend, and see what they can do to help.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Hank while we have him here? Uh, Paul, sure,
Hey,
go
Tom.
ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Hank. I understand that you work with Teriyaki, but just in general terms, in the franchising industry, what percentage of franchisees would you say own their own real estate as opposed to renting or leasing?
I'm always very supportive of people buying real estate. I think it's a good investment. It's a good way of diversifying your financial power. But in actuality, it's probably really low. Like, I'm going to say definitely less than 5% of our 50 franchisees. I think the number of owned locations is maybe two, uh, but it could be even just one or two. And in most system, which was a much larger system, that number was again less than 5%. But I would tell you, Paul, that you should go ahead and if you can own your location, it's the best way to go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Great question. Great. Well, if there are any other questions that pop up, unmute yourself or type it into the chat box. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you, Hank, for being a part of this series, sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your practical tips for implementation to help us and our clients and other folks in the franchise business through this. So we are grateful for your time and for you sharing this information. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you all. Well, have a great rest of the day, and this will be live. We will get this up for a replay here at the latest early next week so that we can share this as well. So thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.